Good afternoon, everyone, and we will now proceed with our focus topic portion of the webinar, which is going to be about the OBBBA. There we go. I'll call it HR1 too. So that will be our discussion, is the HR1's dairy provisions. And before we do that, a couple of notes. One thing I did want to mention is that for the AgWorks webinars that we're doing, make sure you get an understanding, since our sort of target audience here a lot of times is attorneys who are here for CLEs. Those are not CLE programs. Those are not targeted at that level of sophistication. The AgWorks webinars that we're doing on employment law and other labor and workforce related issues is strictly for direct to producers. So just be aware that the sort of the level of presentation will be slightly different than our CLEs. Okay, now before we do the HR1, let's talk about some late-breaking major dairy developments here, which didn't really want to hold on to until the next quarterly dairy legal webinar, particularly something of this magnitude, which is, as many of you may or some of you may not be aware, Harrisburg Dairy has closed its doors. The last pickup of milk from their independent producers was on October 5th of 2025. And this page that you're looking at here has a link to Lancaster Farming's article on the closure, which appeared yesterday. Obviously, there were many things going on in the industry that gave a lot of people who are inside sort of dairy a little more a tip off to what was happening. Producers were notified, and notices as required by the PMM or the PMB's regulations were provided. They were the shortened notice of termination of a milk contract because of exigent circumstances. And I forget I think the regular notice might be 90 or 180 days. This was a little bit of a shortened one. I should remember what that time period is. Anyway, there's a quote from Rob Barley, the chair of the Pennsylvania Milk Board, in the article from Harrisburg Dairies, or from Lancaster Farming, excuse me, which pretty much says the big highlight items or the headline items about this insolvency that you'd want to know, which is that the security fund, which I'll go over that again with you. It covers about 75 to 80% of missed payments to producers, and there was no question that Harrisburg Dairies had a past due amount where they were not paying producers for milk at various times over the last several months. And it doesn't mean that Harrisburg Dairies might not still come up with additional payments, but as of the time that Lancaster Farming talked to Chairman Barley, Harrisburg Dairies owed about $940,000 to farmers for milk deliveries in the last several months, and $730,000 will be covered by the fund. And so that's probably the 75 number, more or less. Now, next week, and Chairman Barley saying that will all come into a little better focus, and maybe those numbers will get fine-tuned a little bit. And the key thing stated in this article was that all remaining farms, the independent producers of Harrisburg Dairies, and I don't believe they bought any cooperative milk, so it's all independent supply, that they have all been picked up by other cooperatives. Now, the handwriting was on the wall a little bit with regard to this development. Back in August, Lancaster Farming had an article about the fact that Harrisburg Dairy had lost their contract with Whole Foods at that time, and that happened in the third quarter. And they even gave us some numbers, which was that the Whole Foods was buying about 230,000 pounds of milk, or 27,000 gallons weekly, from Harrisburg Dairy, and that certainly the loss of that definitely took its took its chunk out of their, their business plan and their ability to move forward. There were 7 terminated farms at that time. And you can see the numbers there. It says they shipped about 238 pounds weekly. So the 7 farmers in Lebanon County were terminated back in August. So that obviously laid a little groundwork and told people what was going on here. Now, at that time, 7 of them were picked up, and it's sort of ironic that Harrisburg Dairies was in fact one of the processors that picked up independence when the Dean Foods owned and operated Swiss Premium plant in Lebanon had essentially ceased operations, and then of course is now reopened and is being operated by DFA. But at that point in time, Harrisburg Dairy was pitching in to pick up some independents who had lost their milk market, and now they unfortunately have lost theirs. And now this little map up here is very helpful to explain to you. This is the producer map that is on Harrisburg Dairy's website, and at this link up here. And it shows you about 23, 24, 25, something like that, producers in this distribution pattern. So, you got it right there. Now, these in Lebanon, I don't know if this number was adjusted to delete the 7 that lost their, that were terminated in August. But the bottom line is, you can see small operation, very tight in terms of, needing to move that milk, to keep everything going. And, just an unfortunate incident as one of our remaining independent processors here in the state that isn't owned by some national outfit or a cooperative themselves. And here are from the article in August and the some of the statements in the most recent article. Looks like, as Chairman Barty said, everybody's been picked up by cooperatives. These are the likely cooperatives that have picked up everybody. Maryland, Virginia, and now they have the Mayola brand here. They own and operate a processing plant now near Philadelphia, and the milk that's coming out of there, and the other products are Mayola branded, so to speak, under the Maryland and Virginia cooperative operation. And then Lyco Penland and Mountjoy Farmers Co-op. Now, there may be other co-ops that have picked up these independent producers, but obviously not a great story for Pennsylvania Dairy at this point. And of course, there's a plant now in Harrisburg that is presumably at some point here in the near future, potentially up for sale. And as I just referenced, Maryland and Virginia sort of saved Pennsylvania. One processing plant got back online and operating that they had purchased. Now we have another. So that is huge news. And just to remember, the Milk Producers Security Act is how all of these milk producers that are owed money are protected. There's a bonding process that goes on, and just refreshing because we covered this all in another one of our Dairy Quarterly webinars not long ago. Here is the bond provision that is required. Basically, it's the C1 in here, and it talks about, filing with the board a bond equal to 75% of the highest aggregate amount owed by the milk dealer to all producers for a 40-day period during the preceding 12 months. In other words, they're measuring it the highest over any 40-day period. So the bottom line is that's where the 75 comes from. There is another way to cover this obligation through being a vested milk dealer, which meant you were around prior to the current version of this act being passed, and you could essentially pay into this fund, the security fund, actual cash, and essentially be getting a credit for that against your obligations should you go insolvent. The bottom line is Harrisburg Dairy apparently was not participating in that. So this is all bond money under C1. So that's just a little refresher on a bit of law, since this is a CLE. And here's a little bit of a refresher that we covered at the last time that I talked about insolvencies. A little bit of the history, if you wanted to remember, what happened back when so-and-so, filed for bankruptcy or became insolvent. Here's the little history. of the last 4 occasions. The Dean Foods occasion is really twice in here because there was 2. That was again what impacted the Swiss premium plant in Lebanon, as well as other Dean operated and owned and operated plants in Pennsylvania. But great story in terms of the effectiveness of the security arrangements and regulations that the Milk Board has in place. That worked as intended, and it looks like it will continue to work in this instance as intended. So that gives you a little bit of an update on all of that. And I'm sure there'll be more news. Now, one other late-breaking major development here, which is that we have a U.S. government shutdown. No surprise there. But the reason I have it included in here is simply that there are some dairy resources out there that if, you have dairy clientele, or you are otherwise, have a role that these things could come in handy for you. There is the CDE, Center for Dairy Excellence, Pennsylvania's organization, has a posting it was actually an article that was published in Lancaster Farming on the 3rd last week. And it's, what dairy farmers need to know about the government shutdown. And there is also a, just so it's here and you have the link to it. This is the government shutdown obviously impacts all of ag in the sense that what parts of USDA are still operating, potentially maybe, and what parts are not because everyone's been furloughed. So here's the USDA lapse of funding plan, which is now, of course, in effect. And FDA also has one, so I put that one in here because they do have little roles, particularly in all the food production and processing. But the big document is the government shutdown, a guide for dairy from the National Milk Producers Federation, and this was issued on the 1st of October. And is a nice little piece of information that lays it all out. And here it is. Sorry for the small type. Again, National Milk Producers Federation is the #1 lobbyist for milk producers in the country. And this was their alert, their update. Basically divided it into 4 areas here. Regulatory and trade. They're noting in the first bullet point that some of their programs are funded by user fees, and those continue and will remain in effect, and there's a list of them. Next bullet point is that the Grade A program, which is maintained, and we actually did a little program on that here in this webinar series. The Grade A program is in effect mostly because that's done by employees who are in one form or another paid by somebody other than USDA, paid by the industry themselves or paid by state, milk regulatory authorities in individual states. And there's like the plant inspectors, et cetera, that do the IMS plant inspections, and everybody who keeps the ability of to use the Grade A designation, and essentially keeps all these markets or most markets open for your milk, is still in effect, still operating, presumably, keep our fingers crossed, with no hitches. USDA Ag Marketing Service and APHIS will continue sanitary and veterinary certificates for export. Other than that, you've got lots of staff who will be furloughed. So there tells you that, things that are being handled by Foreign Ag Service or Ag Marketing Service, others, there will be a lot of stoppage. And you just go to their website, you can find out. The U.S. Trade Representative Office is continuing, and so that is not impacted. I guess very few furloughs is the word from National Milk there. So they nicely compiled all of this. In terms of farm programs, obviously FSA offices are closed, NRCS offices are closed. Various disaster assistance payments will be interrupted, and it has a couple of these listed here. So if you need that resource, here it is. Data reports, all the kind of collection of data being done here. The basic trade or data reports, for like U.S. milk production and things of that nature, those are suspended. Obviously, reporting of pricing information that goes into the FMMO system, the National Dairy Product Sales Report, that will continue because the FMMO system needs to continue. And of course, disaster and disease response, at least in terms of, APHIS, animal disease control issues, particularly with highly pathogenic avian influenza, having a strain that is mutated and impacts dairy cattle, that will continue during the shutdown. And you can always probably find out from PDA, Animal Health Bureau, exactly whether there's any impact on a particular thing that you're looking into. They generally know what's going on at the USDA level as far as that goes. Okay, let's talk about the OBBBA and dairy. Obviously, it became the law on July 4th for, obvious, reasons. And it's basically, remember that this bill was a reconciliation bill of an appropriations bill that couldn't get anywhere or had differing versions of the Senate and the House. And it was essentially to fund some agency operations in the absence of the normal funding or appropriation that might be there for those agencies. And then it became sort of a big pot where lots of things were thrown in. And, in many ways, now that we have a U.S. Government shutdown, you see what this bill did, which is it provided stopgap continuation of certain things that might have stopped if not for its enactment, because we also don't have a farm bill. So these things all get basically tied together here. There are a number of farm bill programs, particularly with regard to dairy, which we'll talk about, that are addressed in here, and there are a number that are not. So the ones that are not fall into the category of, well, gee, will they in fact expire because the farm bill is expired, or what type of extension applies to them? So you got this mishmash. It's sort of a patchwork of different things going on, because originally the farm bill was, of course, set to expire September 30 of 2025. Then some things were extended on December, or extended by either a prior action of the legislature to continue on to December 31st of 2025. And then some were previously extended by the Inflation Reduction Act to 2031. So it's really all dependent on what program are you talking about. And when you talk about the Farm Bill expiring at the end of this calendar year, and there being sort of this deadline of January 1, 2026, some things escaped that because they were in the IRA. So it's a patchwork. You just have to sort of put it together from, what program are you looking at first, and then figure out, is it one of the ones that didn't get any type of extension that goes past December 31st? Now, there is this concept of this skinny farm bill to perhaps extend a few more things, regardless of the ability to agree on an entire farm bill, and we'll see about if that actually takes flight here as we go forward. So here is of course, the table of contents of the HR1, and you can see that there's many titles. This is the Ag title, which is Title 1, and then the commodities section. That's where I put the green star. That is kind of where all the dairy specific provisions are, and there aren't that many of them, but we'll talk about them. First of all, the DMC program, the Dairy Margin Coverage Program, received some changes. And this would have been something that normally would have been in the Farm Bill, perhaps, but in any event. Now, there is basically, just to recap, what the DMC is. First of all, it's the most wildly successful program that USDA or the United States has ever had with regard to some type of income security program for dairy farmers, and this was after a few less than wildly successful programs, and then this was developed through actually Farm Bureau and I think it was University of Wisconsin, and so that's where the idea for the DMC came from. And basically, it just dairy farmers, if they participate, then they will receive payments when the difference between an established national milk price and a defined average feed cost nationally, these are all going to be national numbers, when the difference between those goes below $9.50. So it's a way to guarantee yourself at least that much of a margin on your production, up to a point, and I'll explain the ins and outs. But that's essentially what it does. And let's see if there's anything else I want to cover, and we will go through there. And the key innovation from DMC is that it, of course, gave a, a dual responsiveness to either changing milk pricing in the milk markets or changed feed pricing. So either one of them or both of them can trigger, or be the main trigger for the payment of, or we should say, for the dipping below 950 as the margin between, essentially feed cost and milk price. So, um, and it was originally authorized in the 2018 Farm Bill, so it just has a history back to them. And it was included in subsequent extensions, so it was not in danger of expiring, at least on the September 2025 date, which was sort of the original date that everybody talked about in terms of the Farm Bill expiring. Now, what did it do? What happened? Dairy margin coverage in the HR1 was expanded by taking the basic core package they call tier 1 coverage, which is the less expensive because the premiums are less. It covers the first 5 million pounds annually produced, so you can insure that much milk of your production at a somewhat, the premiums are a bit better for that. And that was designed for small guys or small producers. It was increased from 5 million to 6 million. So the idea was just to account for the fact that, small producers and the level of production, 5 million wasn't quite, a lot of people were exceeding that and still not being, a mega dairy of any kind, so to speak. So the bottom line is that was the first major change. And if you forget how this thing worked, there's two levels. You buy coverage for your first 5 million, that's tier 1, and then if you have production over that, you buy tier 2 coverage, which goes only, you can buy up to guarantee yourself a $9.50 differential in tier 1 up to for your first 5 million. Now it's 6 million, I should say. And then for tier 2, for 6 million and above, now this chart's not updated, of course, with the HR1, it goes up to $8. So you can't buy up to 950 for, if you're a mega producer of some kind. You can only buy up to a guarantee of $8 as your differential between feed and milk price. So just a little recap of how that thing works. And here's the wildly successful part of this is, when you look at the big, this is the most important part. This is a national report on the year 2024. Payments have not been huge this year because, as compared to, bad years when the milk markets are in worse shape. But the bottom line is the percentage enrollment is what shows you how wildly successful this is. And here's Pennsylvania's, and Pennsylvania falls in line with everybody else. About a 72 and some change percent enrollment rate, which is just amazing for any kind of a sort of income protection or crop insurance. So this is not crop insurance, but it's those risk management type product. So quite impressive participation, a vital program. All right. Also, there were some changes in how you establish your production history with regard to that, those the 5 million or the 6 million, what you're going to be able to, which categories will you have tier 2 production that's a little more expensive to insure, or will all your production be within tier 1? Or anyway, the bottom line is there was just a fine tuning to the way that the annual production is figured, because when it all started way back when in 2019, the first year, it was based on 2011 to 2013 production, and then it was extended to include some subsequent years up to, I guess it was 2019. Now, for established producers, your production history is based on 2021, 2022, and 2023. And for new producers, there's a slightly different way to figure out your annual production. So the bottom line is you have to be in business for a while and have been producing. Otherwise you're in the new producer category. This is going to have to change at some point. These numbers are going to have to standardize so they don't have to keep going back in there every couple of years and tweaking the production history. There ought to be one just statement of what production history will be looked at for the purposes of allowing you to insure under this program, because of course the premiums are highly subsidized by the federal government. Okay, now other HR1 impacts, non-tax. I'm not going to get into tax because I'm no tax attorney. But there are some nice resources out there if you really wanted to read them. There's a renewable energy impact here to the extent that dairy farmers might participate, and this dairy farmers the most participation in these types of tax credit programs come from a digester operation that then may produce methane. And then the methane is used to either sold as natural gas, or it might be used to generate or to operate turbines, which then generate electricity. So it's kind of like two ways the dairy farmer might participate in there. So that's just notable. Also, the data collection for the FFMO make allowances, which again is sort of figuring out how much in a milk price is attributable to the processor's cost in finishing out the product and getting it out to the market, so to speak. And they get a credit for that, towards they're in the pricing structure, let's just say, under the federal milk marketing orders. So that will continue. In other words, what I sort of said before, which is the FFMO process has to continue. And so that is, taken care of here. Let's see, the added of funding. I forget what the levels were. I should have that lodged in my head, but I don't. So anyway, let's see. Yes. All right. So that's essentially just assuring that will occur. And one of the problems was in the FFMO reform that just took effect last year, make allowances hadn't been updated for quite some time. So this is a way to go back and sort of say, hey, you know what? We're not being as diligent on that because it's expensive to ask USDA Ag Marketing Service to do these. So it was providing an appropriation specifically to do them because the FFMO reform was highlighting the fact that they need to be routinely done. Okay, and then in the general animal health category, there was some increased funding in HR1, for Animal Health Protection Act in general, and of course that in the end comes down to high path avian influenza in dairy cattle, how it impacts the dairy industry. And we did a whole program in this series on that, on the national, the Animal Health Protection Act. Okay, some trade programs. Essentially, there was additional funding, let's just say, that was, that's what it was, under a thing called Supplemental Agricultural Trade Promotion Program, where $285 million was is a permanent mandatory annual funding that it's now in permanent law. It has to be, set aside for this program, which adds to an existing $235 million that exists already. And again, this is programs of, and I don't know if it's under the trade representative or whether it's foreign ag service. The bottom line is to try to promote foreign markets for U.S. agricultural products. Conservation programs, a couple of those to the extent that they impact dairy, the EQIP program and the CSP, which is similar to, this CRP programs, and the Ag Conservation Easement Purchase Program, all were funded essentially so that they would continue on again, so that, should we have no farm bill, et cetera, these things have received their funding. And then there's also a reauthorization, again, that would normally have happened in the Farm Bill, same thing with the conservation programs, for the transition to organic and other types of organic transition monies. So again, once dairy farmers are eligible there for that. So another way that dairy is impacted. Now, this is an important one. Dairy farm bill programs that are not in HR 1. And again, just to let me see if there's anything in this. Whoop, wait a minute. Sorry. There we go. There were some, extensions here that, this farm bill history is getting quite long because you have the 2018 farm bill as our last farm bill. Then there was an extension to November 16th of 23. Then there was an extension in the American Relief Act of 2025 to 12/21/24. And then there was, the standard expiration of September 25, and then the drop dead extension of December 31 of 25. So that's what we're still looking at, the drop dead extension of December 31 of 2025. It may not be a drop dead extension if another one gets passed, but there does seem to be a bit of an urgency, at least to some, about not doing that yet again. So the Dairy Forward Pricing Program, which authorizes processors and other types of customers to be able to sell, be able to purchase milk at a price lower than the federal milk marketing order price in that particular federal order area, is in danger of going away at the end of this year. So that one is on the chopping block, so to speak, if nothing else happens. It was not dealt with in HR 1. Same thing with the Dairy Indemnity Payment Program, which is a way to receive compensation if you end up with contaminated milk through some process like, chemical contamination or toxic residuals of some kind, nuclear radiation, et cetera. This is not for, your standard, antibiotic positive test, for example. It's a defined list of contaminations. And, that's not in HR 1, so potentially is on the block. Something's got to happen with it. And then now the milk donation reimbursement program, that was a program that came about during COVID, and or no, I guess it didn't. It was in the 2018 Farm Bill, so never mind that. There was a different version of it during COVID. This one just has a that entities, cooperatives, processors, et cetera, I think even retailers can receive like reimbursement for donations made to nonprofits of various dairy products. And so that is, potentially not extended in any way, shape, or form as we speak right now. Let me, hang on. Got something up on my screen here. One more. Okay, and then here's just is almost my last slide. There's one more after this. This is the so-called dairy cliff, which is the Farm Bill cliff, which is this idea that you were going to revert to, in quotes, permanent law without a Farm Bill, and this was all set up as sort of the self-exploding mechanism to penalize for not enacting a Farm Bill. So this tells you the story as to why the price that will have to be paid for milk at the producer level will revert to an ancient equation that will be so high that essentially the dairy industry would come to a grinding halt. And dairy being the first commodity that will have its price jacked up, so to speak, in this manner without a Farm Bill come January 1 of 2026, they end up being, dairy ends up being the guinea pig, and that's why it's called the dairy cliff, is because dairy is the one that's going to be driving over the cliff first, so to speak, without a Farm Bill. That's essentially the gist of HR1, as well as several other things. Here is a list of resources all about the various provisions. And the one tax resource that I talked to you about or mentioned is right here. If you're interested in tax provisions, Christy Tigran from Iowa State, who does the same thing we do at Iowa State. That is, except she's a tax whiz. This is her article, and I would treat that as the authority. And there's some. This is a great CRS report, by the way. Expiration of the 2018 Farm Bill and extension for 2025. You want to understand all this? Go there. These CRS reports are just the best. So I'll just say that if you have time on Halloween Day, October 31st, the guest attorney that we're bringing in for our Understanding Ag Law event that day, this would be noon on Halloween Day, is a guy named Jake Monty from Houston, who is a immigration attorney who is really grabbing this, this need that we have right now to help farmers prepare for, interactions with ICE and dealing with all of your I-9 issues. This guy's really not to be missed. He really impressed me the time I saw him, and I got in touch with him right away and said, "You got to come up and do something for us." So don't miss that if you have a chance.
All right. Well, with that, we will wrap this program up, and we hope everyone will join us on the 31st for immigration compliance, I-9s, audits, and ICE raids, and have a great rest of your week, everyone.